Hello, all.
Yeah, because I saw that.
All right, blow your screen up for a second. Let's just see if anybody's.
Hello.
Hey, Peter.
Hi, Mr. DeBalzi.
Peter.
Hello?
Hello, Sydney.
Hi. So I'm on my bus right now coming home from our playoff game. And I can stay on the Zoom call for the meeting until I get back, but then should I just show up in person?
Tom? Did you hear the question?
Do you want me to repeat it?
Can you guys hear me?
We
Yes.
No echo.
can. We're getting an echo. We're having technical issues, Sydney, with the sound, just so you know.
Oh. Yeah, I'm on a very loud bus right now, so hopefully you can understand what I just said. You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Okay.
Yippee! Yep.
Did you hear what I said before or no?
Tom, could you hear Sydney's question? No? Okay. Sydney, why don't you repeat it?
Sorry? Do you want me to
Why
repeat
don't
it?
Yeah, given Tom indicates he hasn't heard it.
Okay. So I'm currently on the school bus back from our playoff game. And we don't get back until 6:30. So I can stay on for the meeting until we get back and then show up in person. Or yeah, that's pretty much it. I just wanted to let him know.
Okay.
So I think it's up to you. You could just stay online, or you can come down to the town hall.
Right. Just so you know, Olivia will
Yeah,
go ahead.
sorry.
I
You
was
go
just going
ahead.
to say, just so you know,
No,
Olivia will not
I
be
think-
joining us.
I think we need to, and
Okay.
it has to be all sports,
Yes,
because
It's
then
really
otherwise
up to
we
you,
penalize
Sydney.
the young lady.
Yeah, I can, so like I just said, we don't get back
Yeah.
to the high school until 6:30, so I can show up around 6:45-ish to the town hall. That's perfectly fine with me. I'd be happy to show up in person anyways. I hate doing it over Zoom, so
Okay. That sounds good.
alrighty.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello. Hello, Coach.
Hey, how you doing?
Hanging in there. Just so you know, Olivia will not be joining us tonight.
Okay.
All right.
A busy time of year for the students.
Mm-hmm. There have been a number of emails to the board lately, either questioning decisions made or appealing decisions made that we probably should understand how they're going to be addressed at some point, though not at this meeting, obviously.
I hear you. Just it looks like every, this has been a very difficult, time for folks just because.
Lost you, Coach, for a second.
Still there?
Yeah, you're back now.
Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're getting guidance, not necessarily straight direction. So every one of the 60 school districts could be doing 60 different things. And that, can create a lot of, frustration for parents, because, well, so-and-so's kid in such and such a district doesn't have to do this. Why are we doing this? And
yep.
And, that, I know we're all getting the same guidance, but the same guidance we're getting isn't that great.
Right. Yep. Yeah. No, I was just saying that we probably should have a off-band conversation as a board to discuss these issues. I want to make sure that we end up being responsive, even if it's to say we heard you, but that's all we can say.
Right. Well, I guess we'll have to gather those together and
right.
and take a look at it collectively.
I'll address some of it in my opening comment.
Okay, great.
Right.
So Tom, would you be able to do the slides, for the that financial oversight piece from the VSBA for me?
Let me just make sure I can find them. You sent them in the email, right?
Yeah. Initially, it's the financial oversight. And it's a slideshow. Brought to you by, no. I'll basically run through it fairly quickly because, the bulk of what we'll be doing tonight, Russ and Hava and the financial team will be working with.
I was just before we start. Testing. Yeah, my mic is on right now. Okay.
It's a good thing I understand hand sign language. No. Were you able to find it okay, Tom? It's also right on the front page of the Vermont School Boards Association. And there's a line that has the handout, you know, a link to the handout right on the front page. Because it's that time of year, budget review. Budgeting and financial oversight.
Yeah, I think that is it.
Did you find it okay, Tom?
Yeah, I've got financial oversight, the board's role, that one?
Yes, yes.
All right.
Great, thank you. Sorry for the extra here. Okay, I guess we're all set. We have a quorum. Good evening, everyone. We'd like to call to order the Hartford Board of School Directors meeting this 27th day of October. And tonight is one of our community engagement meetings. And our first order of business will be to look at changes, additions, and approval of the agenda.
Coach,
Yes,
I would like to propose a change, and maybe after Tom's update, we have a section for public comment not related to our presentation topic.
okay.
Not hearing anyone else, I'd like to move that we accept the agenda with that change.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second to accept the minutes as amended with a public comment component following Tom's update. So let's move to the update from the superintendent.
Thank you very much. As some may have heard, Peter said before the meeting started, the board has received a couple of letters recently. That with the mask on, it's probably a little hard. Sorry about that, but as some might have heard, the board has received a couple of letters from teachers, parents, and staff about some of the anxiety and the stress right now in the schools, behavior of the students, and just basically general unrest. And I think coaches alluded to it, but I'll restate that there is a lot of stress in the schools because there isn't much guidance. The guidance has been left to each of the individual school districts, and I think we have really good plans in place, but we're strict. So with the COVID regulations, we are trying to keep kids in school. So we follow the COVID guidance around contact tracing and quarantining students very carefully. And so we have had a few cases, but we're getting pretty good at it. And we're keeping kids in school, we're keeping them safe, we're keeping staff safe. So that's been stressful because, the way it plays out in the schools is kids are here. We're not exactly sure how long the students who are quarantined are going to be out. It depends on whether they're riding out the quarantine or they're getting tested and coming back. Sometimes, after a few days of quarantine, some of the students actually show symptoms, so they're out longer. It's hard, and you can't divulge what's going on, and the nurse can't divulge to the teacher how long they think X student is going to be out. So that's a little stressful because you don't know who's coming and who's going. And it's unpredictable. That's the nature of the pandemic. The students haven't been in school consistently and together for a long time. This is going on now 2.5 years, basically. So some of the younger children in the elementary schools, K1, 2, are still having a hard time adjusting to being in an environment with all these other children, and, staff, and strangers and adults. And I know it sounds funny, but when you think about it, their whole school experience has kind of been topsy-turvy with COVID and the way the restrictions have been. Last year was sort of a reduced schedule at the elementary schools, every other day for middle and high school kids. So the foundation hasn't been laid for their school experience like we all anticipate or you take for granted, because that's the way we went. Even our children are older now, that's the way it was. These kids haven't had that experience. So we are seeing a lot of behaviors across the board, but there's more significant behaviors than the ones that I think the board received a letter about are at the younger elementary level. And those are kids who are what we say is dysregulated, kids who are just having trouble getting accustomed to, not doing whatever they want all day. They're listening to teacher directions, they're listening to adult directives, they're sitting and doing schoolwork. Not always the most desirable task for young kids, but we're working through it. Kathy, Roy, and I met yesterday with the leadership of the teachers union and talked about the issues as they're hearing about them, which is always really helpful. Sort of the inside track around teachers and what they're thinking, what they're worried about, what they're anxious about. Tomorrow, we meet with any staff at my office, probably outside, just to listen to the concerns and listen to some possible solutions they have. And then we will meet again with the Labor Management Council Tuesday during the after school lectures during the day, because it's a parent-teacher conference day. So we will meet with them and come up with some viable solutions. And then our next board meeting, I will probably be discussing with the board in executive session some of the items that we came up to try to alleviate some of the stress, improve the behavior, and keep kids in school. We're in it's a very difficult year, and people are working really hard, and the stress just keeps piling on. So we're looking for ways to reduce that anxiety and the stress and the feeling of overwhelmed behaviors and overwhelming things people have to do in schools. It's everything's been just a struggle so far. So I'll bring that to the board on the 10th, and hopefully we'll have some good resolutions. I mean, part of it is listening and knowing that we all acknowledge that it's not the easiest year and that we're doing what we can to make things better. And I'm confident we'll come up with some good solutions. Kathy's going to talk a little bit about the letter you received from a teacher around the new curriculum at the elementary schools. A little bit about that.
Sure. Yes, so as Tom said, there's a letter outlining some concerns, and as you can imagine, adopting a new curriculum is tough in a regular year. It makes it even harder when we're in this kind of a year. And so, you know, I'm working with the implementation team. So there's representation from each of the elementary schools. There's 2 teachers from each school and the administrator, and we're all on the same team, and we work with the lead teacher from EL that coaches us through the implementation process. So, you know, as anything, we have to look at what the situation is right now and make some adjustments, and just taking some time to listen to each of the representatives from each of the schools. I've got some meetings set up with them for next week. And then making sure that we touch base with the administrators in terms of what they're thinking and planning. And really looking at talking with our lead designer as well and communicating the concerns from each of the elementary schools and talking with her about how we can adjust some of the professional development that's going on and refocus, sort of identify where we can focus and what our capacity is for this year, and then figuring out how we can move forward in the next couple of years to sort of stretch out the implementation so that we're not trying to jam it all into one year. So definitely hearing the concerns, and as always, once we hear concerns, we try to make adjustments that help alleviate some of the stress. I think a lot of it has to do with the amount of time that's available to them, and the fact that kids are in and out of the building, quarantining and not quarantining, and how do you teach any curriculum when you've got missing students. So we're going to have time to problem solve some of those issues.
I think one of the underlying innings of the stress and the frustration this year is that we began the year, if you remember, in the summer, very hopeful. And we were really looking forward to a year of renewal, recovery, and sort of getting back to normal and doing the things that we enjoy doing with the kids, and really watching them learn and grow and develop, which is why all teachers get into teaching. And, you know, quickly things turned towards COVID and the Delta variant, and things got sort of ugly quick. Cases started popping. There was a lot of frustration with the lack of guidance. There wasn't the same level of organization that we had last year when things were clearly lined up for us, and guidance was provided, and we were able to really take a very strict, clear stance with the COVID protocols. This year wasn't like that because there was no state of emergency. So I think that set us off sort of topsy-turvy from the beginning, and it was frustrating. And it's still frustrating because we're all like, you know, we've had enough of this, but we're in the middle of it and we can't do anything about it. So obviously the vaccinations are hopeful. You know, still the kids are still being really good with wearing the mask. We're not having a lot of struggles with that. But you know, the cases are popping, and there's a lot of inconsistency and unsteadiness in the year. So that's what we've done, and you know, I think we've alleviated some of the frustration already. We'll continue to do so, and by the 10th, which is when the board has a regular meeting, we'll be able to really report out as to what has risen to the top as major concerns, what we'd like to do to alleviate those concerns, and hopefully have a strong rest of the year. But I do think there will probably be some significant changes to the schedule, changes to the school day for the kids, change to the way we do things, so that we can have a successful remainder of the year, which is what it's all about. And I don't know what impact the approval of the vaccinations for 5 to 12 years old is going to have. Could be significant, depending on how comfortable parents are getting the vaccination. But there was a little bit of hope from that. Questions, concerns, thoughts? Things you want me to report out on the 10th?
Don't see hands being raised right at the moment. But if there are any questions, just go ahead and chime in as board members. So I'm looking at the attendees list, and I'm not seeing.
We don't see anyone raising their hand.
Right.
I'll keep watching.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Thank you for letting
Thanks,
me.
Tom. And Tom, if we need to meet prior to the regular meeting in executive session, we can always call a special meeting and move into executive session to discuss those health-related issues that are fairly restrictive with privacy. So let us know.
Get that screen back with the.
Okay, I guess now we will have the public questions at this time. Russ, did you have a specific point that you wanted to make in that public comment?
No, I did not. I just wanted to make sure it was available.
Yeah, that was something we missed on the agenda. We should always have a space there somewhere, in there. So thanks for.
May I say something?
Yes, Nancy.
It would be a really good thing for Tom maybe to our coach one while this is being recorded so that people can go back and hear it, and to so when they're sending things to us as board members in writing, leaving messages on my cell phone at home, all of those kinds of things, that there is a procedure that we as board members many times we cannot respond to what's being sent to us. So Tom, could you kind of go over that with the public so that they understand, well, maybe when they're sending me these, and Russell too, the same things, that while they may not be hearing directly from us.
That's great. And years ago, we put this on the agenda for the 10th, if it's already coach, but sort of the protocol for the board to hear from the public or the teachers about a specific concern. I mean, like any business, for process, you have to go through sort of a chain of command. So if certain items, appeals, people that are upset with the principal or school's decisions, those issues have to go to the next higher authority. So in this case, like often, they haven't come to me, I haven't made a decision, I haven't been privy to all the details and been able to say, yes, I support the school, or no, I'm going to ask the principal to do X, Y, and Z. and adjust the approach and see if the parent or the teacher is happy, and therefore there's no appeal to the school board. It's not for the school board not to hear the issue or to hide the issue from the school board, but it's to make sure that you're following the right process. In very, difficult cases and difficult problems or big problems or legal issues, the board has to act as the hearing authority. They act like a quasi judicial board. So they're actually hearing the case and try to be as unbiased and to not know all the details until they actually hear the case, and then they have to go and deliberate and come up with a decision and report back to the public and the superintendent about what their decision is. They can't weigh in until they know it's gone completely through the process sort of underneath them, which is the teacher, the school administration, the district administration, which is me, and then to the school board. So when I make a decision that somebody doesn't like, teacher doesn't like, the union, school teachers union or the paraprofessional union or a parent doesn't like, then you appeal to the school board. And they don't weigh in individually. They're going to hear that case as a body, as a 5-member panel. They're going to weigh out the pros and cons. They're going to hear from you. They're going to hear from me. They're going to maybe go into executive session to discuss it. Sometimes they even go into executive session with their attorney to discuss it. They'll come out and tell you what their decision is. So it is a formal process. And not everything's that formal. There are some things like the EL curriculum letter. That's, FYI. I haven't made any decisions, but it's not something, it's something the board wants to hear about. They want to hear, what are we doing? How are we acting? Not necessarily an appeal to throw it out the window. It's FYI. The same with the student discipline, but still, before the board really starts weighing in and making decisions or commenting through, phone calls or emails, the superintendent's got to go through that process, so you're not sort of throwing the process right off the rails. I don't know if all that makes sense, but trying to clarify how that works.
So if I may, in addition to that, what we used to do, and I would like to share the piece that we had on the agenda previously. We would post the process, at the bottom of the agenda. And most recently, several years ago, we actually had the response process that we use for public comment. So for example, if someone had a complaint that they brought up during public comment, we actually listed what the procedure would be. So you might get a response directly, from the board or from the board chair. You might get a commitment by the board to go into executive session to review that public comment. But we do have a process for that. And I'm going to recommend, in order to help people understand, because it's really critical. I've got a meeting tomorrow with one of my other roles for our community, which is the Human Rights Commission. And we, as elected officials, have to be very careful about the judicial process, because as Tom said, we are a quasi-judicial board. So when it comes to making a decision that could be different than the administration's decision, which, it does happen from time to time, we need to be able to be fair through that process. So if and what could happen if a board member has too much information, he or she would have to recuse themselves from the hearing. And we've had that happen, with the commission. We've had it happen with board issues. I remember years ago when we first did our first school bus deliberation, because I had a CDL at that point, I recused myself from that discussion. So there's a little more to the process, but I think that we have had ways to make sure that it's clear, to the public how that works. So,
Coach, can I ask a question?
yes, sir.
Well, it's a formal process. Is there a specific form or format that needs to be filled out for someone to bring a matter after it's gone through the channels to the board?
Usually it's just a written request.
Okay, but I think that's important to clarify, because when we use the term formal, people begin to think there's a legal document or specific document.
Well, the letter becomes that, that piece.
Yeah.
Because it gets entered into the minutes and it becomes the document that starts that process for us, for the judicial process.
Coach, I don't want anyone to think, sometimes people think you're, the board or I am avoiding the issue or avoiding acknowledgement of the issue or public sort of announcement of the issue. And that's not it at all. It's just, it's a process that, the school makes their decision. The superintendent's got to weigh in as part of the legal process as to whether she supports that decision, is going to somehow adjust that decision, or is going to overturn that decision and say, no, Mr. or Mrs. Principal, you're going to do this, and that's the way it is, it ends. If I make a decision and say, no, I support the principal, I support the school decision on this, that's when the appeal goes to the school board. Now, that's not to say anybody in the public has to do anything different than they've already done. It's fine for you to go to Miss Russell. It's fine for you to go to Mr. North if you have a concern and you don't know. You just do what you've done, but understand that you're not going to get an answer that gets into the details of the issue. You might get a response that says, I am going to refer this to Mr. DeBalzi and see what he has done, and then it may come back to the school board. It's not that you have to worry about who you're talking to. It's just that you may not get the response that you want from the individual board member because of that process.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's been
from a member in the public to an anonymous attendee. I don't know if you want me to read that.
Sure.
It says, can the board address the National School Board's letter to the Attorney General regarding parents expressing their concerns at board meetings? Also, what is the new curriculum that was previously talked about? Thank you.
Well, at this point, we could address a clearer explanation, of the curriculum piece, the elementary curriculum piece. I think that Kathy framed the process, but if she could just take a moment to give, being that that's her area of specialty, a overview of what the new design is looking like.
Sure. So it's called ELA education, and it was adopted this year to address the needs of consistency and coherence throughout the 3 elementary schools, and to help address the learning gaps in reading, writing. and English language arts. And we actually have on I'm not sure if it's on the web page, but we've posted it a couple of times on the district Facebook page.
Mhm.
A nice little overview of a video of sort of the whole high level view of the curriculum. And I'm happy to put that on the website again. It's really it's quite informative, and yet I think it just gives enough detail about what it's looking like. But essentially it takes reading, writing, grammar skills, foundational skills, phonics, and integrates it or teaches it through a knowledge-based approach through science and social studies topics, so that students are increasing their vocabulary, which is one of the prominent indicators of reading success, and puts in as well lab experiences, which allows students to practice through play some of the skills that they've been learning through their what they call modules or their basic content areas. So again, I'm happy to put that on the website and also to repost it perhaps on the Facebook page, but it's you can also Google it. It's just called EL Education, and they have some really nice free resources and short videos that help parents and community members understand the actual components of it.
Great. So Kathy, one thing I would ask, when you post it on the other pages, please put that link on the board's page.
Perfect.
Too.
Yep.
So if somebody goes to our page to look, they'll see the link because they might not be a parent.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure.
As far as the national question, we would have to have a review, of that as a board and have a discussion about it. And that's not on the agenda for tonight. The 10th, we could put a time slot, for that, to occur. And that would be the way we would look at that. That makes sense. To the rest of the board.
Assuming that we're talking about the letter sent on September 29th by the National School Boards to the president. But I'm not sure exactly which issue was being raised. I'm just assuming that given the context that may be it, but I'm not sure what we're addressing or would potentially address.
And I think just for the future, the anonymous attendee who asked the question really is supposed to state their name and where they live.
Yes.
Right.
So
that would be helpful, prior to making a decision about having a discussion, because if we don't know what the question, the actual question is,
right,
it's hard to discern.
And could we talk about public comment for a minute? And
Sure.
Coach, can you or Tom go over that section? Because I know I've been questioned about it numbers of times as to why we do it like we do it. Could you go over that for the public also?
Let's see. I think I shared a copy of what we used to post on the base of each agenda, so that everyone knew exactly what our response would be to any specific question, and 98% of them were covered, in those 4 or 5 bullet points. I don't have that right in front of me. Let me see if I can pull up that email that I had sent to the rest of the board.
My thought was more explaining to the public why we do it like that. Why we
Well-
have those certain responses. Why are we doing it like that versus letting, if we had people here, if they wanted to have a question or if they wanted to have a discussion, why we don't have it at that particular point, why we do it the way that we do it now.
Well, what we've found over time, is that that allowed for us to continue to get the work of the board done, so that we did not lose continuity of our work plan, basically. All of those questions are important, so it became important for us to have let's say a process to address them, so that everybody knew what to expect when a question was asked. So I think what it did was offered clarity, as well.
If sometimes the depended on what the question was. Sometimes there was a question and a quick answer. The board chair or board member or myself would easily answer it. Sometimes it was something we needed to investigate, so we didn't want to waste time talking about something that nobody knew anything about, and we were just sort of wasting the public's time or creating more consternation over something we didn't really know about. Sometimes it was something that's going to be on a future agenda or the next agenda. Sometimes there just frankly wasn't time at that meeting to get into a lengthy discussion about, like, for instance, the National School Boards Association response to parents' engagement. Maybe that's something the board wants to consider for an agenda or a chunk of an agenda. You have a really lengthy agenda tonight. If you had lots of questions about all sorts of different things, you might, completely take your agenda right off the rails for the evening and just be responding to questions that no one's prepared for. So you might want to do some things in a more thoughtful way, and that's the way the board a few years ago wanted to do things. Like, if it's a quick answer, great. If it's something we want to prepare for and have a thoughtful discussion of, because it's a great concern, let's schedule it. Let's figure out how we're going to do that. Let the administration prepare some sort of cohesive, report on it, do some investigation, maybe gather some data, see how much of an issue that really is. It was several years ago, we were just going every which way, depending on what someone from the public or someone from the board at a meeting would sort of throw out cold. And we'd be going this way and then that way and then that, and you'd never get to the agenda, and the whole evening was just a sort of spontaneous response to various concerns. It really stalled the board's sort of forward momentum. So again, if people can be patient, it's generally a much more thoughtful way to answer their questions. In the immediate, you may not get any data, you may not have the whole picture. I don't always have the whole picture of every single thing that's going on in data or details, or I haven't talked to anyone. So, planning and preparing for some of the more interesting, more important, or bigger concerns is really a good way to go. So we had a list of 4 or 5 things that the board could say in response to a public comment. Maybe you want me to put those back.
Yes, that's what I was thinking, Tom. If I may, I'll resend that back to everyone, just so they have them, and we'll just re-add them to the base of the agenda, because that's what we used to do. And there were A through G. And the first one was thank the person with no further action planned. The second one was respond immediately by the board chair or the administration. C, direct the administration to contact and respond to the person. D, seek clarification from the administration at a specified meeting. E, add the topic to a specified future board agenda. F, refer the matter to executive session. Or G, hold a public hearing on the matter.
I think it's really important that our public understand that, and that's why I asked you guys to talk a
Right.
little bit more about it. Because
Well,
I know that there's a lot of people that don't understand that.
Mhm.
They think that they should be able to come in here and take over the meeting. Because they have a really grave concern for whatever that
Mhm.
reason might be. And I just think that it was really important that we put this out there. Again, we as the board know this is all going on and we know why, but I don't think that Joe Public does. So I
Your
think
point's
it's-
well taken.
That's great.
And thanks, Nancy, because
Thank you both for indulging me.
no, it's interesting. You noticed how quickly I found that because actually that's what we used to do. And so sometimes some of the old stuff we did was okay. But I'll forward that to everyone, and if we need to amend it or whatever, but we'll have that on the next agenda. And the agendas are fluid, so we can make those adjustments as needed. Being that we've gone into this time to discuss our connection and our engagement with the public, what I think I'd like to do was, because I was going to do that budgeting and oversight sharing from the School Boards Association, I think I'd like to skip that step and move right into the piece that Russ and Hava would be working on. And we will put that explanation piece in the agenda for next week, the next meeting, because that way we'd have enough time, because it won't take a lot of time to share with the public what our oversight looks like. But right now, I think it's important for us to move the discussion into the work that Russ and Hava have put together. If that's okay with the rest of the board.
It works for me.
I was hoping, I was trying to read the room a little bit.
It's hard behind masks.
Yeah, well, that's the hard part, reading the room with mask on is tricky.
Particularly when you're not actually in the room.
Yeah, really.
I hear you.
Yeah. So now we're going to get into a discussion about capital maintenance, bonding, effects on budget. So for one, all us board members have a better understanding of some of the trade-offs, some of the purposes. And two, as part of the education process, so that members of the public are as informed as they can be or want to be about the budgeting process and the effect of various capital improvements. So I will turn it over to Tom right now to talk about the capital maintenance plan and how it was derived, what it is. And is your spreadsheet in the Google Docs that accompany?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So if anybody in the public wants to see this actual document, it is available.
Yeah, it's in the Google folder that's on the board's website with the agenda for tonight. So those out there that can't be here and get a hard copy, that's where it is. But I'm going to be showing everything too in this PowerPoint. So, and Jacob Fazzino is going to jump in and talk about his pieces. So we prepared this slideshow just to try to structure our discussion, and we have plenty of time for the public and the board to ask questions. So Jake, you want to talk a little bit about how you begin the budget process with the administration and schools and me?
Sure. So when we start the budget process, we'll meet with the principals early on in the fall to discuss what needs they're looking at for next year and what changes they're looking to make based on last year's budgets. And then I'll end up meeting with Tom to discuss any changes that he wants to make. Obviously, the big changes to the budget are going to be if we're adding personnel or any program changes. And then, of course, we're working with you, the board, to decide, what you want to do with capital projects and everything else. And then, of course, a big portion of our budget process comes from the yields. And then, of course, the CLA, which will affect the tax rate.
And so anyone in the public that's sort of new to the way the school board does their budget, just realize we do several drafts. We did the first one at the last meeting. We'll do a second one at the meeting on the 10th. And it keeps taking shape, and the board gets more and more information up until probably the first meeting in January, when they really have to sort of fish or cupcake is what we like to say. We know what the revenue projection is, and the board can sort of estimate what the tax rate will be, that all of the people in the public have to deal with and have to be able to afford. So the board takes that meeting very carefully with, how are we going to pay for this? Is this something that we want to propose? What's the increase on a house, on the tax rate, on a home? And they really struggle with that and make sure that it's right, given the economic times in town and the country and the state. So that's how we do it. I think the board's very thoughtful. We guide them very carefully. We start early so that we can get all that information out. We just don't know the revenue side of the budget at this time. We get it in bits and drabs throughout the fall and into the winter. And sometimes, unfortunately, we get it even after it's too late. The board can't adjust, and we've had some really crazy numbers because the state has adjusted the yields or adjusted something late and throw off what we thought our projection was for the tax rate. So overview of the maintenance plan, and I am going to ask Jonathan Garthwaite. Jonathan is our new Director of Building, Grounds, and Safety. Byron Baribeau retired after 38 years a 3 weeks ago, and Jonathan just began last week. So the maintenance plan is in a state of flux in that well, let me talk about this slide and then I'll tell you where we're at with Jonathan's start. But the current plan is an attempt to capture the major projects facing the district. The primary focus is on the 1 to 5 years, so that's kind of like the now. What do we know? What do we really want to start budgeting for? What do I need the board's decision on, the board's guidance? So it's both long-term projects that are known for years. Well, actually, the primary focus is the 1 to 5 years, but we try to capture anything that we know of that's so 6 to 20, 6 to even 30 years. And gets less and less accurate as we go out. We know that we have 30-year roof guarantees on the middle school, the high school, and the new Wilder school. We know that we have different warranties, different, furnace life. There's a life expectancies of some of the major equipment. We don't know what sort of improvements we want to make, or things that are programmatic improvements that far out, but we do know sort of facility maintenance based on life expectancy of equipment and life expectancy of different parts of the building, like the roof or parking lot, sidewalks and windows. So that's what the plan tries to capture, but I think the big focus is on the 1 to 5 years. It needs updating and revision given recent work. So things like the Wilder School, the new furnace last year at the Cleachy School, work on a new furnace at the Dothenbrook School, the fire alarm last year at the Cleachy School. There's some things that need to be sort of updated and captured on that plan. One of the things that I'm working with Jonathan on is making a whole separate tab that's for all of our reference, but the board can reference as far as work that's completed. I think the board should feel pretty good about all the things they've done and everything they've accomplished, and they want to be able to sort of categorize that and catalog it. So when the public asks or when they're reviewing proposals for the future, they can say, wow, look at all the things we did. We did the cafeteria at the high school. We did a few bathrooms at the high school. We did the parking lots. We did the Wilder School. We did the roof at the middle school. We did a new elevator in the middle school. We've done a lot of projects. We built a fitness center. Over my tenure, we've done a lot of construction, a lot of facilities, and a lot of improvements. And one other thing that really affected our plan that I haven't been able to build in yet is how the pandemic affected some of the projects we had sort of in the queue. I really think if the pandemic had hit, the board would have decided to do something about the leaking roofs of the Ottaquechee and Dothenbrook schools. And I think they prudently deferred that because we didn't know how COVID and the pandemic was going to hit our community. So we decided to defer the work on those because of the insecurity of the time last year. So that's all affected the maintenance plan. Like I said, Jonathan started a week ago. We're really excited to have him. He has a lot of experience and he has a lot of thoughts about the maintenance plan and the facility plan and how he's going to structure it. And I really want to give him the courtesy of sort of taking hold of that and putting his signature on it. I'm going to let Jonathan introduce himself and talk a little bit about how he views the maintenance plan and how he wants to go forward. Jonathan, are you there?
Here. Good evening, everyone. I'm 8 days in, so I'm speaking largely from observation. But from the get-go, I think what has become apparent is there are a few concurrent swim lanes towards the same effort. One being identification and clarification of kind of base operational expenses and planning. Those things that just simply have to happen to run the district. And calling those out and defining those, and both in terms of budgeting and the capability to execute to the degree possible, evening those out over the years and stabilizing that effort. At the same time, there are the larger project efforts, some of which Tom alluded to, some of the larger roofing projects, infrastructure projects that are a little bit more complex. But again, backing into it, I think the primary effort is about estimating and forecasting, both in terms of what can realistically be accomplished given just kind of the complexity of the landscape, but also in a way that allows the rest of the financial projections to cruise along with some stability. That's really where it resides now. It is as everyone observes, a volatile time to do anything related to purchasing or bidding or building. And so what Tom and I have discussed, one of the things we've discussed is trying to get at least darts on the board as quickly as possible, and with reasonable flexibility, so that we can make sure we get the big hits, the things that really are critical to operations or of a regulatory nature, that the kind of must-dos, and then align the rest of our planning around those, just to build in some flexibility. But again, it's really the task is right now to identify the different types of spending and stabilize that projection over a period of years, so it can kind of be taken in a reasonable fashion. Not sure what else you'd like me to address, Tom. There's specifics to any given facility or project.
Just showing the, no, I think, Jonathan, that was fine. I mean, maybe we can take some questions from the board or the public.
Sure.
And just flash that screen up again with the plan. Yeah, like I said, it needs some editing. It is primarily accurate. But again, it needs some tweaking. I really wanted Jonathan to get a hold and get his feet on the ground and start tweaking it. This is what it looks like. It's in the board packet, like I said. What we really want to do is build this out and have different tabs for work that's completed, work that's going to be done, and then sort of long range where what we can foresee way out. But,
And I think, Tom, probably one of the questions that a lot of, folks would have in general, not just board members, is there are some items that you put the requests forward from the budget itself. And there are also major items that there are times that you would bring forward with the help of your facilities director to the board for the potential of bonding. And I know that you've had recommendations before in some of those for the different pieces. So I guess within those tabs or highlights, having those reference items could be helpful for discussion purposes as we go forward.
Right. One of the things that this board has done really well is balanced maintenance, leaky roofs, broken windows, that sort of thing, really well with projects that are called enhancements or programmatic enhancements to the education, the programs we offer to the kids. And you kind of need to be responsive to both.
Tom?
Yeah.
I think you brought up a very good point. There are things that we need to do because they are required maintenance. And there are things that we need to do either because they are aspirational, brand new fancier library or something like that, or because programmatic or growth or whatever requires it of us. If we were to get 600 new students suddenly, we would have to do things. It would be helpful if they were all sort of collected in the same document and perhaps on different tabs, but at least so we had some idea of how they interacted with each other. And the other one is a very, very minor nitpick. I am happy to see that you have the district offices in Covell House and the Kristen Street Outdoor Education Center on this document as placeholders, but I think we also need one for the Wilder School. It may be brand new, but it, like any facility, is going to depreciate and deteriorate as it gets older, and we need to have that just as a placeholder as well.
Yeah, definitely. All good points. I think that's one of the things we're going to discuss in a minute. Of the projects that are on this slide, in the next 5 years. These are the things that are sort of on my list, on our list, the district, administration, school staff, that we need to tend to, or that we really want to do, that we want the board to consider. And then, how, and will we talk about it within the budget, we'll talk about bond projects, but again, just to get them out there quickly, the Ottaquiche roof, Dilton roofs, both of these, as the board knows, but I'll refresh their memory. They were both problems from when the buildings were designed and built back in the early 90s, both 92 and 93. The roofs weren't built with the proper pitch, with the proper overhang, and there was a big lawsuit in which the school district won, but the money was spent on other needs at that time. And that wasn't the worst decision. The roofs did not need to be torn off and repaired at that time. Suppose the funding could have been put in a reserve account, but with the rules of the reserve account, we're supposed to spend it within 5 years. That wouldn't have worked either. So they're at a point where they are failing. We do have multiple leaks. We've done some repairs on the Dilton roof. That's why the estimate for that is a little lower than the Ottaquiche roof. But they don't just need a new overlayment, like you might put new shingles on the roof at home. Maybe you do the underlayment and the shingles. These two roofs, they need to be torn off and rebuilt. So from the roof joist up, they need to be rebuilt. New plywood, new underlayment, new shingles, or whatever we decide to do. Because the pitch has to be changed so that the snow and rain falls off and doesn't sit on the roof and rot the roof. It also doesn't slide against the edge of the building down the masonry. Right now, it's metal standing seam roof, pitched roof. It was sort of an interesting, different idea when those two schools were built. A lot of people said that wasn't a great idea. It's nice that the snow falls off it, but when you have snow falling off the second story of an elementary school, and the size of those roofs, it's a little scary. And we have to shovel it away from the building so that the egress is not blocked. Sometimes it falls right in front of the doors. And if you have a standing seam roof, and anyone who does have a metal roof, that if you don't get out there and take care of it pretty quickly, shortly after it falls, it's like cement. So anyway, the design that we have, and we actually have a design and plan and had an engineer do some work on it before the pandemic, called for the rebuilding of the roofs, greater, steeper pitch, and a asphalt shingle, 30-year shingle roof. Jonathan's going to do some research on that and figure out the pros and cons of different applications there. The best room is a project at the HACTC. You've already got a majority of the money saved. The price has gone up, but that's on the list as far as a project we'd really like to do. Cobble House you purchased 4 years ago, I think, from our neighbor at the central office. I think it was a great purchase. It's a beautiful piece of property that sits right at our front entryway. And the board and administration need to make some decisions about what we'd like to see done there. We've had some estimates done to turn it into an office building for district offices. We also have some other ideas that are pretty exciting about some sort of reduced cost housing for new staff. So we'd like to sort of chat that thoroughly through the school board. Middle school interior is something I've wanted to do since I started. The middle school, it's a beautiful building. It was built very well in the 50s. It's really stood the test of time. I think it's very attractive from the outside. We've done a lot of improvements to make it look very nice. But it's a little tired on the inside. It's actually very tired on the inside. When I say tired, I mean the ceilings are old and the stain. The lights are very old fluorescents. They're dull, and the finishes on the doors are worn and the original finishes, we'd like to have those redone. We'd like to have new LED lighting put in, new ceilings and new, bathrooms, new finish, new fixtures, new ceiling, new lights in there. So we actually have some estimates on that I hope will be ready to go for the board to decide whether or not they want to do it. Problem with that project is prices have gone way up on the ceiling tiles for whatever reason are really expensive right now, doubled in price. So that project might have been for $400,000 just prior to the pandemic. It's now more like $800,000, $900,000. The high school library, this is responding to the needs of the students and the needs of our curriculum. High school, library, the size of the high school isn't really something that is utilized like it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. There's a lot of space dedicated to books and shelving, which isn't what we use anymore. So we would like the board to consider moving the library down to the foyer area in that classroom off of the H lobby and opening that up so it's a bigger foyer with the library right there and some comfortable chairs for the students and some computers, and use the current library and the small rooms around that as what we call Fab Lab. So it would be for the kids to design, build, do more hands-on work. We've had a lot of success with kids being much more involved in their curriculum, much more involved with what they're making, what they're creating, and so we have a whole presentation prepared for the board if they're interested in going down that route. High school also needs bathrooms revitalized. One of the things, it's kind of an interesting problem to have. The bathrooms are in very good shape. They've always been well maintained and they're very clean and neat, but they're very dated. And they're old and the fixtures are old, and we really want to do update those and modernize the bathrooms. The locker rooms in the gym are very antiquated, a lot of wasted space there. They were designed when kids always showered after gym, teams showered after games. So there's a lot of space that's not really utilized right now. It's very old, very dated, and very tired. So we think we can use that space a lot more efficiently, a lot more better. The lobby in the gym, the glass hallway. The glass hallway is very inefficient. Pretty beautiful spot, but it's not very energy efficient. It was, made before heat was so costly and oil was so expensive, and so that needs to be redone. And then I put this on here really as a placeholder, the Christian Street property. If the board decides to build it out as some sort of outdoor education center, I don't think we need much in the way of expense, but it's just something I'd like to have on the list as far as some sort of bus turnaround, maybe some water, sewer, or road so we can access it, but no expensive building, anything like that, but just some expense that could be related to that. So any questions about those, or any questions or any of this so far? Because the next piece really gets into bonding.
Well, I guess one of the things that I'm not sure, at least for me, we've gotten into enough detail, is the consideration about future benefit versus current budget type thing. And I have expressed concerns before that by solely relying on the current budget to fund some of these necessary improvements, work, whatever you want to call it, are we shortchanging today's student for the benefit of the future student? And that's one reason I would like us to try to think in 5 or 3 or whatever intervals, because then as we get into the bonding discussion, then it might make more sense to make a bond versus each year doing a bond, because there is costs. And we want to try to balance that all out, because we can only borrow so much money. But by the same token, I just hate to think that we're not at least considering alternatives. What we decide is, you can never really, it's driven by circumstances, but at least to be thoughtful and considerate.
It's something the administration has struggled with for a long time. What projects come from the operating budget? What projects should be paid for with the bond over several years? So I'm all ears. I'm very interested to see what the board has to say about that. I wonder if everybody understands what we're really talking about. You know, there are projects when the budget allows that I think it is prudent to do within the budget and get it done. You know, for instance, the middle school roof a few years ago, the board was ending the year with surplus and decided the roof needed to be done and needed to be done for a long time. Let's do it. So that money wasn't going to be used. It didn't affect the students' programs. The programs, you know, wrapping up for the year, everything was paid for, and we were in a good place. The board did that project. Now, something new, an enhancement that's really not for the benefit of the kids who are currently in the school and benefiting from the educational programs that are happening in the year or the years that they're there. Those really, I think the point is well taken. That should be something that's spread out over the years of the students who will benefit are in attendance. You know, it's not a perfect science, but
Right.
it's a good, I think that's a good balance. Think about it.
So Tom,
The project in the library, that's the next 20 years of students who will benefit from that.
so Tom and Russ, I think what I'm hearing, you know, is really positive, and this is really helpful, I think, to our new facilities manager too, this particular discussion, because that will help him better inform Tom and the administrative team around that discussion. So possibly to help this along, we might consider developing at least an initial rubric that we could use to frame those discussions, you know, as we do this, so we don't have to start from scratch every time. You know, if we've got kind of a template that, and that will help Tom too, because he'll be able to come to us with something we've mutually developed that can help us jump off the conversation, you know, fairly readily, knowing that these were the expectations. Does it meet, you know, current expectations? Does it, the effect on the budget, the effect on current students, future students, you know, those types of things, you know, we can look at as parameters within a discussion, I think.
Tom, could I speak to that briefly?
Absolutely.
Just so from a planning perspective, one of the things we've talked about that I think is that follows closely on what you're saying is, you know, we talk about a distinction between operational and aspirational efforts, and that's real. And I think there's value to distinguish that. And as Tom said, you kind of need a separate worksheet, so to speak. But in terms of what we can produce as a planning tool, I think planning tool is the right word, not a report. Something that is a continuously updated living document that while it acknowledges that real distinction between the operational and the aspirational, also acknowledges that they're not mutually exclusive. You know, we can proceed with what we must do from an operational standpoint in a way that enables, supports, leverages aspirational thinking, and vice versa. There's no reason we can't do you know, a library upgrade in a way that is mindful of a reduction or stabilization of operational costs down the road. And it kind of, one feeds off the other. So I think I think your point is very valid and very much in keeping with conversations that Tom and I have had about maintaining as an exercise that distinction, but also having a planning tool that wraps it all together and puts it in front of you folks so you can make informed decisions on a continuous basis.
Well, I'll stop being clairvoyant, but
Oh, I think Nancy has a question.
I have a question. So when I'm looking at this sheet, I don't see anything in here even as a marker or place marker. Is the bit of land that we talked about at the last meeting?
At the bottom, I just put the name, I believe, Christian Street property.
Oh, is that what? Okay.
That's it. I haven't put any costs in there.
Okay, I see it. Sorry.
We're shaping this. It's
Okay.
work as we speak. It's kind of a living, breathing document. It's always been, on top of everything else I do, trying to keep this up to date, trying to figure out like where the board wants to go, what's the most important. Now with Jonathan here, we can really put some teeth into this and use it as a working tool, like he talked about. I don't foresee huge costs there, but I do think we're going to find out about water and sewer. First of all, if the board wants to pursue that project, find out about water and sewer in that part of Christian Street. It's not supplied by the town, I don't believe. And also, pavilion, a road and some zoning.
right.
Costs.
Yeah.
That's really about it.
Mhm.
It's not going to take a lot of money to do what we'd like to do there and have those children benefit.
Thank you.
So we'll get those costs together with a plan the board can consider.
So I think I don't mean to interrupt, but the other thing I would suggest as we go through you and Jonathan go through this process is there may be a level of expenditure for an improvement that's just small enough that should be absorbed. So as you go on the ongoing maintenance plan, maybe you build that in saying 50,000 just for small items, that type of stuff.
Right.
And think in the bonding criteria, and maybe even come up with a guideline, because all of this is just going to be guidelines. We have to adapt it to the yearly circumstances. But then maybe a project over 100,000, 200,000 would be right for a combination in the bond if the board decided to go forward with it.
And I think there are some
Point well taken, Ross.
simple rules with certain things like furnaces,
Mm-hmm.
like that. But, and the other factor that this board and we contend with in Hartford is because we're the host of the Regional Tech Center and the collaboratives, those add another layer of complication to this equation. Because sometimes it doesn't make sense to bond there. Sometimes it does. Sometimes, any sort of surplus at the tech center like you had last year, it's really welcome to put that into a savings account, so to speak, for a project. It's very complicated for the districts, the sending districts, to take that surplus back. They don't necessarily want it back. They'd like to see improvements to the programs. So it's a little different at the tech center and Black. All right, so I think we covered this slide with that discussion, and what we do is go into this next one. There it is. Jake, do you want to talk a little bit about this one, bonding considerations? And this is sort of background foundation for the school board and the public to understand about bonding, sort of how it works and what that's all about.
When we're looking at considering for a bond, the cost is going to be about $7,500 to $10,000 just for legal fees, because the lawyer is very involved with the application. It's a very lengthy application that you're submitting to the bond bank that requires a lot of time and effort from the main SUPS office. And then just as a FYI, our debt service, that's principal and interest, is about 4% of our overall budget. And And then as far as the thresholds for the level of debt service, I've reached out to our auditors to see, is there a percentage guideline that, our max should be X? And they're doing some research for it. I know that there is for municipalities, but she's looking into whether or not that applies to school districts as well. And then there is some coordination with the town and the town's overall bonding capacity. I don't know if you want to speak about that, Tom, or.
Sure. I mean, this has always been a professional courtesy that the school board and the select board have considered each other's sort of bonds, possible bonds. There's been years where the select board wanted to do, I think, town hall, and the school board wanted to do White River School, something like that. And you don't want your bonds for the municipality and schools and municipalities sort of be fighting with each other. You don't want the taxpayers or the townspeople to be fighting, well, should we do this or should we do that? Should we do, the sewers in town, or should we do the renovation of the old White River Elementary School? That sort of thing. So something that the two boards have always worked out together. Hasn't always worked smoothly, but in general it has. So that's something, the tax base only can handle so much. You don't want to be asking for two bonds and add a tremendous amount to what taxpayers are going to see in their bill next year. Because it's all one bill, as you know. So that's important to think about. What's on the town's docket for projects. And the last one's common sense. I mean, the effect on the budget, tax rate, increase in tax rate depending on closing rate and yields. The bonds ebb and flow. And Jake, I think he's going to get into a little bit on the next slide about how that works. So do you want to talk about this one, Jake, and I can put up the
Sure.
When you're ready.
So I reached out to the bond bank, and I said, what would it look like if we decided that we want to achieve a lot of projects, and we did a $5 million loan over 20 years? What would that look like? So Ashley from the bond bank got back to me with an example of what that would look like.
Oh, you don't. Sorry about that. I had it all queued up to be in the to be right embedded in the PowerPoint, but it didn't, too much. So this is the projection view.
Yep.
Jake, you
So-
want? Oh, sorry.
5 million over 20 years. Interest, we're
No.
looking at about 2.33%. And I'd just like to clarify something with the interest that we clarified with the bond bank is this interest rate is basically an average over the life of the loan. It's not like, when you have a car, your interest rate is X. It varies year to year because each year has its own coupon rate. So it's going to be over the life of the loan, it'll be about that, but it's not going to be exact.
So we just guessed at what, if the board wanted to consider this. Obviously, if they decided they wanted to do 3,500,000 or some lesser amount or greater amount, we could get those figures for you. But trying to consolidate some of the maintenance and improvement projects you have now into one bond, came up with a guesstimate of $5 million over 20 years.
Could you clarify that comment about the coupon rate? Because I've always been under the impression that we had locked in a rate for the life of the bond, and therefore we're not subject to the economy going crazy and interest rates going up to 17%, because we had done the bond at a time in which there were low rates. Is that not the case, that it actually is every year they figure out the amount you still owe and the interest rate for this year, and you're more or less at the whim of the market?
It's going to vary year to year, but I mean, when you're closing in at your rate, when you close your bond, you're going to be about that. I mean, you might be slightly under that, but I don't think you're going to be drastically over that. But it is based on market conditions year to year.
Okay.
Right.
So in other words, the interest rate is fixed, but it also depends on what year we bond.
Right.
Correct?
That makes sense.
Right.
Yes. If we buy this year when it's 3% or next year when it's 5%, we're going to pay, but depending on what we bought when we bought it. But we're not going to have to worry about 2032 when all of a sudden the interest rate goes to 17%.
Right.
Okay.
And I mean, right now that would work to our advantage because historically interest rates are as low as they're ever going to be, because you can't go,
Yes.
they're not going to go below zero.
Well, they have effectively on occasion, but yes.
Not on the face.
Yes, we are running the printing presses full speed at the moment, pushing money into the economy to try to keep it afloat, and as a consequence, we are awash in low cost of money at the moment.
The only other thing I'll add is when we were talking with Ashley at the bond bank, the summer bond pool for 2021 closed at just over 2.5%.
And humor me if you could, Jacob. This 300, let's just look at the example here, and in 2024, it's 345,000. That's treated like a normal expenditure in our budget. It's not, I mean, basically it's just money we're spending, and that's part of whatever we vote on. Is there any penalty or any assistance or anything like that that we should factor in?
Sorry, what was that, Russ? I cut out on my end.
Oh, okay, no problem. So each year's bond payment, whatever it is, that's part of the principal and interest payment for that year are part of our operating budget, correct?
Correct.
And is there a penalty if we exceed something, or is it treated differently in the calculations? Like for the tax rate? I think he cut out again, unless he's incredibly good at sitting still.
Not drinking sauce.
Jake, were you able to hear
I'm not sure I'm understanding your question, Russ.
Oh, basically I'm saying, so it's just like any other expenditure. Its impact is just a dollar spent when we consider the budget. There's no benefit or penalty for spending or having bond payments, correct?
that?
Correct.
Okay, that was my question.
Yeah, I got it. And the one thing that I never understand, you cannot pay the bond off early. The cost of the bond is sort of attributed how long the term is. So if you say 20 years, they're basing the bond payments and everything's based on that 20 years. If you pay it off early, you throw off the whole calculation. They don't want to do that.
And the investor ultimately would be very upset.
Right. So it's
Right, that's right.
Okay,
That's unlike a house bond or house mortgage, where the bank usually allows you to pay off early if you can come up with the money. People are coming up with the money for these bonds are really looking for a guaranteed income stream for a period of time, and that's what they want.
That's correct, Peter. Yes.
okay. You all set with that? We can go back to. We covered all that. Jake, you want to talk about these questions a little? What percent of the budget should debt service consume? Is there a percent guideline? We did a little.
This is something that we've reached out to our auditor about. Officially for school districts, there isn't anything from what I've been able to research that there's a specific guideline around it. But obviously, I think it's a balance of how much debt does the town feel comfortable with and the school district. But it's something our auditors are researching and we'll get back to you on.
And internally, we just might want to set a guideline for budgeting purposes. So you could have a placeholder saying up to 10% of our budget or whatever the number is goes towards capital improvements type thing, just to assist in the trade-offs would be my thought.
And that goes back to that rubric that we talked about, Russ.
Yep.
That the board could very, simply put together and, with the help of the administration, of course, and the facilities managers, so that it's fairly clear. And as he said, and oh too well, those are living documents because they're constantly, shifting depending on financial streams and things of that sort.
Yeah. Your thought process is right on in that regard, Mr. North, because it's the same reason why you might have got into bonding versus putting it in the budget. You don't want the cost of that bond to not overwhelm the budget, but have such an impact on the budget, taken away from the current students and the current fiscal needs and responsibilities of the school district. So that's, I think, what you're sort of weighing out, that how much is our debt load, and is that somehow taking an inordinate amount of the operating budget to pay?
Yeah, I think there is a difference between ordinary operational costs and bond costs in one respect, and that is if you run into a financial squeeze, you can make tough decisions about avoiding some of your operational costs. You can defer maintenance, you can reduce program sizes, you can do things, but there's very little you can do about your bond other than defaulting, and that's not a good idea.
Thank you, Peter. That's a great distinction, great point to remember. Right. Moving right along.
So when we look at bond rates over the last 25 years, it's been pretty crazy with the economy. It's varied from 5% to 2.5%. And then when we look at the Wilder bond, we're at 1.36% to 3.098%. And then variable rates based on the other bonds from the audit report last year.
Any other questions? We are going to get into what we currently have in place for bonds.
I'm all set.
All right. So these are the balances of all our reserve accounts as of September 30th, 2021. We have the construction reserve fund for capital projects. We have the fuel reserve fund, the systems repair reserve fund, the technology reserve fund, the tech center fund, and then the vehicle replacement fund.
Yeah. I guess that's later on the slide, but the state's ruling around how long reserve funds can remain in place. We'll talk about that in a minute. But any questions about the reserve funds that are there?
So reserve funds usually act as a way to offset the fact you've got a depreciating asset. You know that your building or your truck or whatever is going to need to be replaced at some point. You start putting money aside in anticipation of that needed replacement. Yeah, are they also able to act as, in some ways, an insurance policy? And this may run into that limit on how long the money can stay in the fund, but we expect that we're going to get hit by ice damage or weather incidents of some kind. We don't know when, we don't know how much, but we want to put money aside in case we get hit by that big storm. Is that a reserve fund function, or is that really need to be dealt with some other way?
I think it could be used for reserve funds in that way, that it's an emergency that you didn't really budget. I mean, if you had a catastrophic event where, you have several $100,000, I think that absolutely could be a reserve expense.
I agree. Furnaces or some major piece of equipment that, expect to sort of blow up, but does.
I guess if you got to the end of your reserve fund area and it didn't have it, you could, if you set it up properly, spend it on something that was not so immediately but needed, but
Exactly.
but you would also have money set aside in case something bad did happen.
Exactly. Honestly, I don't know if this one's gonna open either, but I'm gonna try.
And I think we have to be careful as well with the unique statutory nature of some of these funds, as far as being sure that each successive board understands what those criteria are. So it might make sense to have footnotes, of some sort that, help explain that in order to utilize this fund or to put money into that fund, it can only be for X amount of time. It has to meet this criteria. Because I think that could be helpful, for folks, like, let's say when, any of us decide to retire from this work, the next group, it would just be helpful, I think, help them hit the ground running.
And I'll just amplify something I think Coach said. I think because as I understand it, you have to use them within a specified period of time. So that information would also be good if we're trying to think.
Yes.
Not in the current year budget, then future year. So we'd have an idea of what might be available and when we have to use it.
Yeah. And I don't know if Jake wants to talk to this, but this is your current debt load or bond load. So you can see across the top what it was for, what the payment is for the next fiscal year, when it'll be paid off, interest, so on and so forth, how it's actually divvied out. So if it's like the fitness center was the high school and the middle school, all broken down. 2015 bond, which was what River School, the parking lot, the Wilder School, and then the totals in the far right column. It's in your packet if you can't see it well here. I don't know, but so that's what you currently have. Jake, did you want to say anything to that?
Nope. Unless there's any questions about the current schedule. This is FY23 and onward.
So theoretically, we could look at this and say in 2034, we could take on additional bond or debt financing and keep our total debt cost the same and have new debt. But until that point, we're going to be adding to our total financial costs.
Yes.
Yeah. Now remember, the Wilder School is slightly deceiving because That bond is not entirely borne, the responsibility by the Hartford School District.
Yes.
That number is not complete, full picture of the debt load for the Hartford School District because of the sending schools as part of tuition.
Yeah. Our actual cost is significantly less than that because everybody who sends somebody to the school helps pay for the cost of the school, including the debt load.
Right.
Okay. So questions there? I just found that very helpful. We paid off a lot of bonds, when I started, we had quite a few that were left over from old projects, so this is all current, up to date.
Jim, do you have something to add?
Yes, I do. If I can, I just want to say, certainly taxpayers in Hartford have to recognize the superintendent of schools, Tom DeValzi, and the Hartford School Board for having really overseen making sure that the buildings have been well maintained. And the only reason I can say that is if you look at other districts within the state of Vermont, many of them have done zero because they're still waiting for the state to reinstitute their funding aid. And I don't see it ever happening, but again, I will say this, thank goodness that Hartford has maintained and supported the infrastructure that they have, because it's going to save taxpayers a lot of money in the future. So, thank you.
I would echo that comment. I think the board has done a fabulous job of this, and we've caught up on so much of the work. To the fact that we're talking about a couple of maintenance projects and then several sort of programmatic enhancements is amazing. It's terrific.
Just to give you an example, depending on the size, of a school building, replacing a facility similar to the size and structure, of the high school, for example, you're looking at, in the area of $85 to $130 million.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so imagine trying to bring that bond issue forward. But there are districts, as have been mentioned, that because of decisions made by the community, because this is a community decision, every action of consequence has been supported by the community of Hartford. And that's why we're in this position that we're in. So it puts us as board members in a very high tension situation in a way to ensure that we live up to that responsibility and make sure that we get our best guidance together for our taxpayers and our community. And I'm proud and humble of that work that our district has done over the past few years.
You only have to look next door at Woodstock to see what happens if you get the wrong position.
Yeah, they are.
Or Burlington.
Or Burlington, indeed.
Yeah.
So Burlington's complicated by issues around contamination of the school and things.
Mm.
And the taxpayers here are not looking at a complete building renovation or, a new building. Because like Coach said, we're talking 85 to 150, $200 million. I think Woodstock's high school proposal was $85 million. Don't quote me on that, but it's close.
It was in that range.
It is in that range. They want to build a completely new middle and high school. Because they feel that current building is not tenable. Worth the repair. So, Jake, were you going to talk a little bit about reserve accounts and some of the rules around that?
Right. So when we're talking about liquidity concerns, we really have, well, you have access to transfer these funds at any time. Obviously, if we have a catastrophic event that comes up, that's something that couldn't be predicted and we need to take care of it. We have access to that. Best practice, of course, is to put the reserve accounts in the budget for $1, and that really gives the board the legal authority to access those funds. And then consideration for future reserves, when we're looking at planning ahead, it's a little bit of keeping track of when we're putting those that money into the reserve accounts. And on the next slide, I'm going to tell you why. So 24 VSA 2804, Part A basically just says school boards can establish a reserve account. And then once we get to B, if a reserve fund is established, the section to pay a school district's future school capital construction costs approved under 16 VSA Chapter 123. Any funds raised by the district as part of its education spending to pay for those future costs shall be considered approved school capital construction spending in calculating excess spending under 32 VSA. Districts shall submit to the Agency of Education annually a report of deposits into and expenditures from a school capital construction reserve fund. If the Agency of Education determines that any amount in the reserve fund has not been used for approved school capital construction within 5 years after deposit into the fund, then 150% of that amount shall be added to the district's education spending in the then current year for purposes for calculating the excess spending. And this really only applies to the capital construction projects, which when we asked our lawyer years ago, this would be the construction reserve fund, that 414,877, and then the systems repair reserve fund, 17,382.08. Now, there's been a whole lot of cloudiness regarding when these funds were established. And when we contacted our lawyer, we said July 1st, 2017 would be the start of the clock on that. So obviously, looking ahead, next year is going to be the 5 years for those two funds.
Thank you, Jake. Questions about that?
We also have some reserves set up for non-capital reasons. What are the criteria to be able to set up that type of reserve?
The statute itself only applies to the capital projects, and our lawyer has said it really only applies to those two accounts as it stands right now.
So in other words, there are no requirements.
Okay, is there any limitations?
Not that I'm aware of, Jake or Jim. Do you know them?
No.
Other reserves?
So we're facing a bit of a deadline in terms of spending the money in the capital accounts.
Correct.
Yeah. They knew that going into it. You're supposed to earmark it for a certain need and you're supposed to spend it within 5 years.
One of the questions, or Tom and I brought up a question for Tom before the meeting. If we had decided to go forward with a bond, would it be possible to take some of our current surplus and allocate it, let's just say, to cover unexpected or over budget HRA reimbursement costs so that then we could keep the overall spending level in any current year?
You may not know the answer to that, but.
Yeah, I understand that, and maybe we can get
We can
the answer.
investigate, yeah.
Yeah,
You know, and Russ, the problem that we have now with the HRA, it's first dollar expenses.
Right.
And so, and I just want to tell you, our HRA, we reserve at the start of the year, 1.1 million. And that is $1 support before Blue Cross Blue Shield gets involved. So, you know, previously when it was at the end, we used a rate of about 65% consumption. Now, I can't tell you. I have no clue.
and I understand that, Jim, but it would be worthy to have a discussion saying, of that 1.1, what if we were to put 300,000, I'm just picking numbers, in a reserve, in an actual reserve fund, so that we wouldn't have to put it in the budget on an annual basis. And if we went over whatever figures on the budget for the first dollar reimbursement, it would come from the reserve account.
I will say, Russ, I do think that's worth pursuing. And maybe as well as that retirement piece that we're in a similar situation with.
Yeah, because then that would
Makes sense.
by spending if we went forward with a bond. Because like in Jacob's example, the annual payment was around 300,000. So if we did that, could reduce the HRA by the 300,000, it would be tax rate neutral.
Yeah.
At least first years.
Russ, for the people listening who may not be clued in, can you explain what the HRA is?
Health reimbursement account. It's basically for employees to help cover their health insurance costs.
Right, under our health insurance, we are bound to help pay for some of the costs incurred by our employees. And it used to be that we paid an amount sort of guaranteeing that our employees would never pay more than a certain amount. So we came in light, as was said. Now it's changed. We pay the first dollars that get spent.
And technically that's being negotiated at the state level. So
right,
whatever the plan is, we live with what is determined.
What they come up with, yes.
Yeah.
The only questions I would have, and I do think it's a good idea to pursue and investigate. One is that I vaguely remember when we were deep in the throes of a conversation around reserve accounts, that you couldn't use it for anything that was an operating expense. So we just to make sure that.
Absolutely.
Remember that, Jim?
We'll be within the rules, but it's at
Right.
least worth following up on
Yeah.
to see if we have flexibility.
And then we also kind of want to have a year of what did we spend as we moved into this first dollar thing? What did we actually spend, and is it prudent to say, 65% of that 1.1 million, or basically the 35%? Is that really realistic? Is that the realistic number to put in a reserve in case we spent more than 65%? Just to, what's the gauge that we don't put too much in and then
Right.
have to hit our budget to pay.
It'd be nice to have some historical, point.
Yeah.
Is an actuarial company able to come up with a number for us? I mean, that's the kind of thing they do.
Yeah, maybe, Peter. That's a good suggestion.
Hmm.
Yes.
And don't we still have a actuary under contract from the work we did during negotiations, or at least accessible?
Yes, we do.
Absolutely. It's a good conversation, Matt. Good thought. Thank you.
Yes. Good.
That was really the end of our presentation. Russ and Hava came up with the agenda. I hope we addressed everything. If we did, what can we talk about now? What thoughts, concerns, ideas do any of the board members have about any of this? Or the student rep?
So,
It's a lot.
Tom,
Yeah.
I think we did a very good job of explaining what the issues are and eliciting some of the questions that we need to answer. We haven't yet, I don't think, come up with a process to get to the answers to those questions. Is there some process we should be engaged in, whether it's setting aside a subcommittee of the board, whether it is finding out the right consultants to bring in and to answer questions, something that we should be doing to attempt to provide ourselves with an understanding of what the best, or at least what our choices are and the best possible solutions among those choices.
Yeah, I think that is the question. What should the next step be for the board, or the board demand or request to the superintendent to pursue? Yes.
So I think we have named a few things. We talked about two different rubrics. One, looking at the process for determining where the spending should take place, as far as the bond versus budget, and what lines up, to that. I mean, that's a general, statement. I think it'll, when we go back to the minutes, it'll be a lot clearer, because I know Sherry took very good notes about that part of the discussion. And then the other piece is the actuarial discussion. And that should be pretty clear. And the tool that was mentioned as well by Gary. Those were just a few that jumped out for me.
The last one I would think of, Coach, is since we have a large bolus of money that we need to deal with before next year, or we will face fairly serious penalties in terms of our
Right.
tax rate.
Yes.
How to best spend that money. This is about to turn into a poison pill on us.
Exactly. So let's turn it into a positive.
Yeah.
Because that was part of the reason for doing that. And what's interesting is we're going to be having the same discussion at the state level, because of COVID revenues, basically, which is kind of weird when you think about it, but at the same time, there are funds that came into being as the result of the pandemic, that aren't federal funds.
Okay.
Yeah, we're also, what complicates it a little bit for me is that the cost for construction right now is really outrageous.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little frustrating.
And quite frankly, the time frame for any construction, whatever it is you need, may be sitting on a boat from China for a very long time.
Or falling off the boat.
And then the labor to do the project is also troublesome.
Yeah.
So it's not the ideal time, but what I'm trying to provide to the board is have everything sort of ready, at the ready, so you can decide what you want to do and when.
Well, it's fascinating your point, Tom, about the construction. One of our residents who owns a production firm, construction production firm, actually called me about an individual that we both know, because finding staff is difficult for everyone right now, and especially in the construction trades. So I just found that interesting. It's like, okay, everybody's looking and they're asking, so just another piece to the puzzle.
So other thoughts on how to move forward?
There may be some merit to doing a working group subcommittee, because for one, that would more narrowly define because we may need to hire a consultant, but right now, I'm not sure what we'd be asked them to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be nice for some sort of a smaller group to do some work on, that slide where I talked about, possible projects, what's sort of on the docket, on the list.
Mhm.
And maybe there's a few others, but I mean, those are the ones that have just been percolating for a lot of years. And it'd be nice to have some,
Some direction.
Yeah, direction, some prioritizing of those projects. Maybe first a little study about exactly what do they entail, and then what sort of resonates with the subcommittee, and then maybe what should be brought back to the full board to really go, we're really liking this, we really like this, or prioritize them. We like them all, but we see this one first, second, third, fourth, and really sort of dig into it. And then you have a lot more information for the board to say, do we want to try to have some sort of bond that consolidates a few of them? Or we're really talking about, these two that we want to do right away. Some of them might pay for themselves a little. There's a lot of there's a lot of positives to certain projects that we didn't get into. Even Christian, there might be some grant funding that can really support any sort of build out on that property, because that's outdoor education is huge right now. The equity issues around the bathrooms at the middle school and the library is huge, something that the board really needs to address. The Covell House, if you weren't going to go with sort of an office building, you were going to go with some sort of a supported staff, in the first year or two of employment, as far as a reduced rate apartments. I mean, that would be huge. Right now, we're having a lot of trouble attracting staff. If you were to do something like that on the quality of our programs and the quality of who we're attracting and staffing, that would give us a huge edge. And it would be something no one's ever done before, and it could be a real positive, because to turn that building into something that it isn't, which is an office building, is going to be really expensive. All sorts of ADA requirements, all sorts of other things you've got to do. To turn it into apartments, that if we're even allowed to do that, wouldn't be such a stretch, because that's what it is. We could renovate, make it a lot nicer, put in a kitchen that people would share, a couple of bathrooms with showers, and then have, their bedrooms, that would be. So that's a whole different cost. It might be a lot more reasonable and really do a lot for the district as far as attracting quality employees and beginning teachers and staff.
So I really want to get going on the roofs. They've been sitting way too long.
Yes, yeah.
But at the same time, I'm going, if we did something in the Christian Street property because it's intended to be an outdoor thing, maybe it won't need a whole lot of building supplies, and it will just need work. And maybe that is in fact the best way to spend our money, so we're not buying at the highest point of the market.
Exactly.
Well, that's a point well taken, Peter. But I think to go back to Tom's point about, having those discussions so that the board can make some decisions, some concrete decisions, especially for this cycle, because all of those play in a timely way around the disposition of those reserve accounts.
Right.
Because we
May I
ran
make-
into that several years ago when we had to, we made a decision as a board to invest in our technology infrastructure with,
Thank God we did.
remember? And I'm glad you're right, but that was a decision based on the same circumstance.
So may I make a suggestion?
Sure.
This is a much wider scope than the Wilder School questions. But the approach we took, engaging with members of the community who had insight into construction, insight into the needs of students and so forth, proved to be a very effective way of taking advantage of the brain power of our community. Maybe we should look at establishing something like that again.
My response to that, Peter, would be point well taken. And it's a good idea. But we would also need to ensure that people realize there's a short timeline.
Yes, it would be
Okay.
very short.
You know, we wouldn't have the luxury of the time that the
Mhm.
Wilder project had or any of the other projects.
Right.
This would be a task force, you know, that would need to hit the ground running and rock and roll, so to speak. I have no problem with, you know, ensuring that the voices, you know, are heard.
Mhm.
But that would be the only consideration.
Right.
Well, it certainly worked well. I'm a big fan of the process we used. Worked much better than anything we had done prior to that.
So what I'm going to suggest in thinking of this, the expediency piece, is that being that Russ and Peter and Hava and Nancy and actually myself too, but with the folks that we know, if we could look at what we'd want that group to look like and how large it needs to be, you know, if we're talking about, you know, 5, 6 people, you know, 7 people, and you know, with Peter's planning commission background and Russ's you know, financial contacts, you know, like, you know, around this country actually, and Hava's, you know, work, you know, around education, and Nancy's with early ed as well, you know, I think, and the school board's work, you know, we should be able to come up with, you know, some recommendations, you know, fairly quickly for what that group should look like. You know, not necessarily all the names, but at least the types of folks we might want. You know, maybe an architect, maybe this, maybe that. You know, those kinds of. So we have a framework.
Right.
Coach, if you recall, when we did Wilder, we did just that. We developed sort of a rubric of what we accomplish in the team. So I'd be happy to sort of dig that up and bring it to our November 10th meeting.
Great. And that's it. You know, we've done this, you know, before, and I think those good experiences like that, you know, that had good results, you know, why wouldn't we want to do good work? You know, so.
Yeah, I'll do that if it's all right with you.
Oh, yeah.
Dig it up, and I think it's very applicable. And you have the membership, timeline, and philosophy, and it's probably very applicable to this meeting, maybe with some tweaking.
And I'll put myself out there as volunteering to be, if the rest of you agree, part of the board representation.
I
And
think that would be fine.
I would be happy to, well, not happy. I shouldn't put it that way. I will make, the time to commit, to work with that group as well, because of the nature of, the expectation.
All right, great. Well, I hope I accomplished the task. I mean, it was a lot for tonight, but it was a great discussion for me. Hopefully it served you all well. Thank you very much.
And just an aside before we get to that, the final steps of the meeting. I hope everybody saw the list for public comment, because I did send that to everyone during the meeting. So you'll have that for review.
And for the public who might be listening or will watch later, we do have the 4 vans coming every Monday and Thursday right now to do the COVID vaccinations and the booster shots. And they're here every Monday through and Thursdays from 4 until 8.
Nice.
And they're doing it very efficiently, very quickly. You can go online and make appointments, or they're accepting walk-ins too.
And the website says Pfizer only, but it's actually all of the different
Right.
brands, of varieties of shots. So
It is.
Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, and Pfizer, and boosters for each.
Yeah, now that they've been certified.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually going along with that, if I can, the Department of Health has already scheduled a clinic for 5 to 12-year-olds at the White River School next week. And they're working on scheduling one for Dothan Brook and one for Ottauquechee. I haven't
Cool.
got exact dates yet, but they're doing that. So trying to be readily available for everyone.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy.
Well, if nobody objects, I would like to move that we adjourn.
Second.
So is there a second?
Yes, I did.
Great. So we have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. And Hava, just before we go, I'll give you a call right after.
Thank you all.